says, and Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi. He was asking his disciples, saying, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Great question. They said to him, they said, some say you John the Baptist. Others say you Elijah. Some say you Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Jesus asked the greatest question of all. Everybody got an answer. Well, how about you? Who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, he said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered and said to him, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in the heavens. And I say to you and I say to you also that you are Peter. And upon this rock I will build my church. Somebody say, my church. My church. Jesus' church. He says, and the gates of hell, the gates of Hades, will not overpower her. Amazing statement he says about the church. He goes on to say, and I will give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. That's what we're going to lock in today. We continue this study about the kingdom. We're going to get some understanding about Jesus' statement in terms of giving his church, represented by Peter, the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And he goes on and says, and whatever you bind upon the earth will have been bound in the heavens. And whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in the heavens. Then he ordered his disciples that they tell no one that he is the Christ. In this well familiar passage of scripture, what we call Peter's declaration of Jesus as the Messiah, he connects Peter's confession to the role of the church. Matter of fact, this is the first time that Jesus mentions the church in his ministry. First time he mentions the church. It's connected with this idea. His church is associated with, first of all, Peter's confession of who Jesus is. Jesus asked him the question. He says, who do people say that I am? Because a lot of people, just like today, in Jesus' day, was not all that clear about who Jesus was. Man coming to town doing signs and miracles and wonders, but they still wasn't really convinced about his true identity. So he starts off by saying, who do the people say that I am? What people saying about me? Right? Matter of fact, that's the conversation. That's the most important conversation you could ever have with somebody, is posing this question: who is Jesus? Who is he? Some were saying Jesus was just another prophet come to town. Some were saying Jesus was John the Baptizer. Some were saying Jesus was Elijah or Jeremiah. He just one of those prophets. Since that's the wrong answer, Jesus goes on to say, but who do you say that I am? Right? Because Jesus is not just another prophet. Right? He's not just a prophet like Jeremiah. You know that, right? He's not just a prophet like John, the last Old Testament prophet in the New Testament, John. Right? And he definitely not like the prophet Muhammad, though he ain't listed. Some would try to put him on the same plane with Jesus. And Jesus says, well, who do you say that I am? He getting to something. Who do you say that I really am? Right? Now he's not asking Peter what's his name. Right? He's not asking Peter like, what's my name? My name is Jesus. That's not what he's asking. He's asking him a lot more. He says, who do people say that I am? And so Peter says, you are the Messiah. You are the Christ. See? He answers Jesus not based on Jesus's person, his personhood, in other words, his name, Jesus. He answers Jesus based on his title. A title is given to a person to describe his function. right? What his role is, right? What his assignment is. That's the title. Right? That's why we call John the Baptist. Doesn't mean John belonged to a Baptist church. It meant John's function was to come to baptize in water, preparing the people to receive the Messiah to come. Peter says, you are, matter of fact, in the Greek it is you and only you. That's the literal. You with me? You are, and you are the Christos, the Son of the living God. The Christ. Christ is not Jesus' last name. He's not Mr. Jesus Christ. With me? Christ, Christos, the Greek translation of Messiah, is his function. Are you with me? It's his function. Okay? And that's important because Peter is identifying Jesus as the long-awaited Jewish Messiah. Okay? Question then is, what is the function of a Messiah? What is the function of the Christos? Simply one. Okay? It is to rule on behalf of Yahweh. He is God's king. He's coming. His assignment primarily is to rule. Now this is before he goes to the cross. Okay? The cross is a pathway to functioning as the Messiah. He's got to go to the cross first. But his ultimate assignment is to reign. Don't miss that about Jesus. Okay? His ultimate assignment is to rule over all that's opposed to God's righteous rule on earth. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. That's what Jesus' function is. Right? His assignment is to come and to bring all things back under the rule of God the Father. Okay? That was lost at the fall. Jesus is coming to do that. He says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. In other words, you've been anointed. That's what the word, the Christos, the anointed one. That's who Jesus really is. Right? He's the Messiah. Now this going to play into, I want you to think about this. I want you to grab this. He's like I said, he's responding to Jesus based on his function. And the reason that's important is going to feed into the function of Jesus' church. If you're taking notes, stay with me. We track it, right? He didn't identify Jesus based on his name, Jesus, Savior. He identified Jesus based on his primary function. His main role is to rule. If Jesus had a resume, it would have one word on it. King. That's it. King. In the Hebrew, Melech. In the Greek, Basileia. King. You with me? He came to rule. And Peter says, that's who you are. That's who you are. That's your function. That's your title. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus' function is going to feed into the function and the purpose of his church. Okay? Remember, his function is to rule. His function is to come and to set up God's kingdom on earth just as it is in heaven. And Peter says, that's who you are. You're the Son of the living God. And Jesus, watch this now. Jesus answered Peter. Peter got it right. Jesus answered Peter. He said, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. That's Simon's. Simon is, we call him Peter, but his primary name is Simon. You with me? Yes. He said, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. He said, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Watch this, here we go. And he said to him also, watch this now, and you are Peter. You're Peter. Now remember I just said Peter answered Jesus' question. The response was, this is your function. He didn't say you are Jesus. He said you are Messiah. You here to rule. You here to reign over stuff. Jesus answers Peter not by his name, translated Peter, but he's really answering Peter according to his function. His function. Stay with me now. I want you to see what's happening in the text. You with me? Jesus was answered by Peter according to what his function was, what his role is, Cornelius. That is to reign and to rule, to establish God's rule on earth. Jesus says the same thing about Peter. Let me tell you what your function is. Your function is you function as a stone. He says you also, let me tell you your function, Peter, you also are Petros. Petros, the Greek word. It is the word for a little stone. With me? You function as a stone, Peter. What do you use stones for? To build stuff. See where we going? See where we going? You need a stone. Last time I checked, you need the material in Jesus' day to build houses and edifices were primarily stones. That's why he says, you are a stone. We translated Peter, yeah, that's his what we call, that's Peter's surname. And I looked it up in the Greek lexicon. I typed in Petros and it came up surname for Simon. Simon is his real name. Petros, Peter, is his surname. And a surname describes a person's function or achievement. That's what a surname is. Jesus answers Peter according to his function. You're going to be a stone. You're going to represent. I'm talking to you as a representative of my church that I'm going to build, since I'm the builder. So you're going to say later, I will build my church, right? I need some stones. Yeah. And I'm starting with a guy like you. See, check it out. What you're here for, if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, you're a stone. Yep. That's what you are. You're a stone, Cornelius. You're a stone, Misha. You're a stone whereby which Jesus gathers and he builds his church, not Ray Glover's church, right? Not this denominational thing we see. No, this thing is built of people characterized as stone. In Jesus' hands, he's building his church. Okay? You with me? Just laying the foundation. We're talking about Jesus and his church and how it feeds into this idea of the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And so he says, you are. So I'm going to answer you, Peter. So he couldn't be telling Peter, hey, you know what? You're Peter. Like Peter don't know who he is. Hey, Cornelius, you're Cornelius. Hey, Misha, you're Misha. Right? Wouldn't make sense, would it? We're talking about function. We're talking about function. So Jesus responds to Peter's confession of his title as Messiah, which is to reign and rule. He responds to Peter saying, okay, let me tell you who you are. You're a stone, whereby which I'm going to build something. This thing called the church. Ready? You can keep going? Amen. And he said, you are Peter, you're a stone. Second part of verse 18, he says, and upon this rock I will build my church. Here we go. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Now I got to really get down into some debatable interpretations here about what does this rock mean. Jesus says these profound words to this little guy he just identified as a stone to be used to build his church. He says, and upon this rock I will build my church. What is this rock? Many scholars say, well, he's talking about Peter. He just called him a stone. Is it Peter? Is he the Pope? He the man that the church is built off of Peter? That he is the founding father that the church is built off of? Is that the interpretation? Some say, yeah, Peter, he's a stone, and so yeah, that's what he's really saying. Some say he's referring to Peter's confession, his statement. that his statement is what Jesus built the church off, that everybody who confesses him as Messiah is what Jesus, that's the statement that is he's building his church on this confession of Peter. Possible. But if we dig a little deeper, I think it's another interpretation I'm going to go with. Based on this word that he uses for this rock. Okay, the word when Jesus uses, he says, and upon this rock is not the word Petros for stone. It is the word Petra, not Petros. It's Petra, Greek. Petros is a little stone. Petra is used only for a massive formation of rock. Okay, Petra is used for a massive formation of rock and stone. You with me? So it's a contrast between Petros, refers to Peter, a stone, and this massive foundation, Petra. Okay, it's gonna have to do something. It's gonna help us see what Jesus is talking about with his church. Are you with me? Why does he say that? Why does he say it's upon this rock? Because the place where Jesus is standing is called Caesarea Philippi. I've been there. I literally stood where Jesus is talking to Peter. I've been right there. Wow. And guess what it is? It's a massive rock. It's a massive foundation. It's 500 feet wide and 100 feet tall. That's Caesarea Philippi. Jesus is using a play on words. I'm going to build my church right here. Stay with me. Okay? Caesarea Philippi was a massive foundation of nothing but rock. Like I said, 100 feet tall, 500 feet wide. Jesus is using the location to teach something about his church, Misha. Because at this place that he says, he makes this statement, this place was known as the gates of hell. That's what it was known for. Caesarea Philippi was known for, had a history of a place where they built temples and shrines dedicated to pagan and false gods. It was known as the headquarters, the central place where false gods were worshipped, who served the forces of darkness and the kingdom of darkness. Now we're getting somewhere. Yeah. You with me? Yeah. With me? That's what the place was known for. Matter of fact, it's similar to the place in the Old Testament we call Bashan, right? Where it was the headquarters for satanic activity. This place was actually a place that had been dedicated in history to a pagan god named Pan, P-A-N. Okay? A god of nature. God of humanity. Right? Jesus says right here, right here in the den of satanic activity, I'm going to build my church here. He's using figures of speech to talk about the role of the church. Right? See, this place, Caesarea Philippi, would be similar to Las Vegas. You right, Sin City. Right? Where you go to do dirty, where you go to flaunt your sin and enjoy it. This place Jesus is talking about, it would be a haven for demonic activity. This is the gates of hell. And he says, right here, I'm going to build my church, my temple, made of little stones. Are you with me? Amen. Like you, Pete. With me? With me? This place, Caesarea Philippi would be like New Orleans, Louisiana, down on Canal Street, where they flashing, where they do all kind of stuff. You might walk upon anything being done there. Go to New Orleans, I'm down. That's home. I know what's up down there. I've been there. I know what's happening. It would even be a place like Atlanta, the underground. I'm trying to get you to feel it. Yeah. That's where he's at. He's at a place like that. He's underground where men sleeping with men and girls sleeping with girls. And there's all kind of nasty stuff going on. They do everything down there. Because it's backed by Satan's power to do so. It's do whatever you want. Whatever makes you feel good, do it right here. This is Caesarea Philippi. Anything opposed to God's will is done there. We bow to other gods. And the God today is sex. That's the king of gods today. Sexual immorality. Jesus tells Peter, I'm about to build this thing. I know they build temples for Pan. They build temples for false gods right here. I know what this rock is all about. I'm going to build my church on this rock. This is the interpretation I'm going with, okay? Let me show you why. You with me? He's letting you know, he said, and my church right now, now he's about to move into, he's teaching them the function of his church. Remember, we talking about Peter has identified Jesus' function. Jesus has identified Peter's function, which feeds into the church function. And here's the function. It says, and the gates of hell will not overpower it. Don't miss that. I'm going to build my church in a place that bows down to false gods, supposedly the gateway to the powers of hell, which bad people to rebel against me. I want a church. I'm going to build a church out of little people like you, not to be afraid of that, but to engage with that. It says, and the gates of hell, right here, the demonic, okay, will not overpower it. That's the word he uses. He says, and the gates of hell will not overpower her. The word refers to something to have a superior force and power. In other words, no matter how much evil is being done backed by Satan's power, I'm about to put something in place that can deal with that. And that's you. That's the church. Let me stop for a second. This is a whole different perspective on what the church is supposed to be about. Huh? This is the first time Jesus mentioned the church. And he don't say nothing about, I'm about to build something that they're going to have a lot of conferences going on. I'm about to build something where the people going to have a lot of leaders that write a lot of books and stuff. I'm about to build something where they're going to have a lot of events going. They're going to be meeting in these big places, and they're going to have a lot of good singing and a lot of concerts going on. And that's what I'm trying to build. He said, I'm going to build something, right, that can deal with the gates of hell. That's what he says. Right? And the gates of hell, that is, all that is opposed against me, backed by Satan's power, will not overpower it. That's the church. That's who you are. Yeah. That's the church. Right? That's the church who is not on the defense. The church is on the offense. It's not huddling up inside, afraid of the enemy. It's going at the enemy. Every time I read the Old Testament, it's amazing to me that God's people, Israel, was sent into the enemy's den, the land of Canaan. Right? Yeah. I'm taking you out of Egypt to the land of Canaan, okay? The centerpiece of idolatry and paganism, right? Not to take sides, but to take over. Right. Just got through reading the book of Joshua. My Bible reading, right? Right? They going in to conquer, man. They're not going in to ask Jericho, can we come in? We come in to take over, to establish God's rule in this wicked and vile place. That's the church. Yeah. God's people is always supposed to be on the offense, not the defense, not afraid of Satan, not afraid of devils and goblins and ghosts, and not running back. Not backing up like Michael Jackson, but moving forward with traction. Amen. That's the people of God. That's the church. Standing up for righteousness in an evil world. Yeah. Calling sin what it is and saying, no, that's rebellion against God. And bow to Jesus. He's saying, my people, this church right here, what I'm building is to be on the offense, because gates are intended to keep something out. Yeah. Hell, all that stands against Jesus is supposed to fear the church. Say it like that. Not the other way around. Yeah. This is what he says. If it's my church, right? If it's my church, right? What church would glorify Jesus being afraid of the enemy? No church. Yeah. He says, in my church, I will build it on the gates, and the gates of Hades will not overpower her. That's what Jesus said. That's our role. That's our role, right? It's to establish Jesus' rule since he's Messiah, since he's king on earth. And right now, until the kingdom comes, that's what the church is up to. That's what the church is supposed to be up to, right? Not sleeping, not head in the sand, not getting caught up in politics, not looking to the government to make things right. No, you make things right. When you move into a place, you say that's evil, and you say that's wrong. You call out what it is. That's the church. Don't look to the White House, look to your vote behind a booth. I don't need to get my candidate up there to fight for righteousness. That's my role. That's my calling as the church. It's not a building, it's stones that Jesus has assembled, right, to advance against the gates of hell. The gates of hell, the figure of speech, for all that's opposed to Jesus' rule, that's the gates of hell. For all that is anti-Christ, that's the gates of hell. And Jesus says, I'm going to build something that can deal with that, and it's called the church until the kingdom comes. That's our role. That's our role. Not be afraid. And he goes on to let him know how you do that. How you can stand against all that evil, all that wickedness, right? Evil men, evil spirits, and all that stuff. He says, watch this. Here's the answer. Here's the answer. He says, and I will give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Here we go. You got to use some keys to do it. You got to use keys, right? I will give you the key. I'm not going to leave you without something that you can use to deal with the gates of hell. That's the keys. You with me? You got to know how to use the keys, though. I'm going to break it down with you. He said, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven. Jesus making a big deal out of these figures of speech. Let's talk about keys, Felicia. What are keys for? Keys, right? When I was given my truck, my Nissan truck, God just gave me a truck, right? Right? And along with the truck, they gave me keys, Misha. They said, here you go, Mr. Glover. Here's keys to your truck, right? Now, what the keys did, it symbolized, guess what the keys mean? It means that I got authority now to access my truck. Right. I got authority now to access my truck because I got keys. First of all, keys symbolize authority. You've been authorized to deal with the gates of hell. You've been authorized by Jesus to go in and take over, to go in and lay down God's laws, to go in and settle Canaan for Yahweh. You've been authorized to invade Los Angeles with the truth. Yeah. Because you got keys, right? Keys symbolize authority, right? Access to authority. Access to authority. Jesus is authorizing his church to deal with his enemies. Don't miss that. Okay? You've been authorized. So when they gave me these keys in my truck, I was happy. I got access to the authority to get in my truck. But not only did I have access, right, to the authority to get into this truck, but I also had access to use the power of my truck. Right? It ain't just enough to get in there, but the same key that was giving me to access my truck, that authorized access to my truck, gave me access to power to turn my truck on. Are you with me? See, these keys Jesus is talking about, it gives us access, not only, it gives us authority to access the kingdom and to access kingdom power.
Come on.
Are you with me? To access kingdom power to deal with anything that opposes the rule of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. That's why it was important that he identified Jesus as Messiah. Jesus comes to rule. You with me? And so he gives us keys, he gives us authority, right? To use his power, the power of the kingdom, to deal with the gates of hell, to deal with satanic deception, to deal with rebellion against God's rule. We got power. Right? You got power. And you got kingdom power. There's no greater power than kingdom power. And Jesus said, I'm giving it to you. He's not giving it to the Q dogs. He's not giving it to the AKAs. He's not giving this access to power, right? To the United States government. No matter how many F-16s you got, or nuclear subs you got, that ain't his power. His power right here in these keys. Are you with me? Right? To establish Jesus' rule in Hollywood. On the set. You're not walking in powerless. You got keys. Except giving you keys, right? Right? Access to kingdom authority and the power of the kingdom. Are you with me? You with me? See, it's like this right here. Right here. I got something. So we said Jesus is Messiah, and he functions to establish Yahweh's rule on earth. But since Jesus is in heaven right now, he needs an extension cord. You see what I'm saying? He got here the plug. This is heaven, and it's plugged in all the way up there. I got to do this plug in. And it extends on earth. This is the church. This is Jesus. Are you with me? Amen. You're an extension of the rule of Christ. That's what he's saying. I'm in heaven, but I got an extension cord called keys. Whereby you can access all the power you need and the authority you need to establish my rule on my behalf. That's the key. You with me? You see? You his extension cord. Right? Why be afraid of anyone? Yeah, exactly. Or anything? Yeah. Yeah. Not even the gates of hell. That's what he's saying. Not even the gates of hell. You with me? So I'm giving you keys, man. Right? I'm giving you authority to access kingdom power, and the gates of hell will not overpower you. Right? Since I function to rule and to reign for Yahweh, right, to bring that rule on earth until the kingdoms come, I got you plugged into the kingdom. Yeah. It's the kingdom of heaven. Right? It's the kingdom of heaven, where my Father is. And you get all the power you need. Watch this now. Watch this now. Now we know what the keys are. How do you turn them on? How do you turn the key? How do you get this truck to start up? Keys in Scripture were only given to, don't miss this now, were only given by a master to a trusted servant. Don't miss that. Keys in Scripture were only given by a master to a servant he trusts. Key words: trusted servant. Trusted servant. In other words, if you want to use my power, you want to plug in to deal with anything that's opposing against my will, the gates of hell, as my church, right? To stand against it, to overpower it, not succumb to it. All you got to do, first of all, is be trustworthy. Can I trust you? Can I trust you to use my power to establish my rule? Otherwise, you can't turn the key. With me? That's the only reason you can use it. And then the next word is servant. You got to serve the king. Jesus is king, and kings have servants. Not talking about just churchgoers, not talking about people that's clapping and doing all that. That's good. We need that. Keys, that is authority and power of the kingdom, is only given to a trusted servant. That's why many Christians have no power.
Come on.
You're not really serving Jesus. You don't really confess him as Messiah. You just confess him as a Santa Claus, as a genie in the bottle, your fuzzy-wuzzy teddy bear, your homie, your road dog, just to come get you, do for you what you Jesus, Peter says, you are the Christ. You're the Messiah, right? I exist to serve you. You don't exist for me. You don't exist to serve me, Jesus. You Messiah. You King. You ruler. I'm your servant. Now we got something now. I can give you keys. I can give you keys because I can give you access to all this kingdom power because I trust you to serve my purposes, to serve me. And when that takes place, you just turn the ignition on. You just turned it on. You got the keys of the kingdom of heaven. They fully operated now in your life because God has trusted you to serve his purposes as king. Jesus has got this extension cord called the church all the way down to the ground, connected with all the power we need to establish Jesus' rule until the kingdom comes. We plugged in. That's why he goes on to say, whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will already have been loosed in heaven. Don't miss the tense of the verbs. Right? Some translations say whatever you bind will be bound. Whatever you loose will be bound. No, the Greek is a future perfect participle. Future perfect. It means something that has already taken place in the past that affects now the present. You with me? It already happened. In other words, you got now the kind of power that whatever you say on earth, right, has already been done because you've aligned it with heaven. Right. You've aligned it with what God is doing. Right? Yeah. In other words, you've aligned what you're doing, what you're seeking to do with what God's will is, that Christ be king and everything, and you've aligned your life to that, and so you got all the power to bind stuff. Binding and loosing was just a figure of speech to mean that someone has authority to bind and loose. Anything that was bound or loose, right, it was done by someone who had authority to do so. You bound sheaves in the field because you were the crop harvester. You had authority. You bound someone in prison because you had authority to do so. In Revelation, the devil will be bound for 1,000 years because the angel has authority to do so. It goes back to the fact that you have authority and power on earth to do my will. To magnify Jesus, to spread his rule on earth as it is in heaven. Therefore, whatever you say, whatever you bind, it's not about you going around saying, I bind you, I loose you. Ain't what you're talking about. Right. You got nothing to do with that. Mm-hmm. It's a figure of speech to demonstrate that you have authority. Right? You have access to power. Right? To bring the kingdom of heaven on earth until the kingdom really comes. Right? To live as kingdom people. Right? To show people what it's like to be ruled by Jesus and have the power to make an impact and a difference in an evil world. You can call it the gates of hell. Yeah. That's what you're living in right now. All hell has broken loose. All hell has broken loose. Well, man can say I'm a woman, and a woman can say I'm a man. Right? We look on TV all the time, there's so many murders you can't count them. All hell is broken loose. Right? What people call right wrong and wrong right. All hell is broken loose. And the only answer is the church. Not the White House, not the president, right? Not education. That's fine. Right? Not even a whole bunch of stuff going on in the church that's passing for the church today. No. It is this church who understands that it is the last hope. It is the only solution. And it's the only institution that has all the power and backing it needs to establish righteousness in the land. Which is what Israel's function was. He sent them to conquer, to take over, right? To move out Canaanites and Jebusites and anything else that rebelled against God. God's people have always been assigned to go in and deal with immorality and rebellion against God. That's his function. Yeah. And that's the message today for the church. You got to know who you are. Yeah. You got to know who you are. Right? The definition of abuse is using something for which it was not designed for. That's abuse. Right? You try to use a golf club to paint a house, it ain't gonna work for you. Use a baseball bat to rake leaves, won't work for you. The church is designed for one thing. You with me? That is to be trusted by Jesus to serve his purposes and to establish his rule everywhere we go. By using his power and his authority to do so. And Jesus says to Peter, that's what I'm building. That's what I'm building. I'm not building some people who are wishy-washy. Yeah. I'm not building some people who just seeking to compromise. I'm not building a thing where people just trying to be comfortable. I'm not building something where people are always trying to fit in. Right. I'm not building this thing where people are just nice all the time. I'm building people to conquer. I'm building people to take over. I'm building people to rule for me because that's who Jesus is. Yeah. That's who Jesus is. And so we go into places where hell has broken loose. We go to Los Angeles. We go to Venice Beach. We go where the pornography industry is in Van Nuys, California. We go to Hollywood where corruption is on the set. That's where you're supposed to be. That's where you're supposed to be in those settings. Because that's the church. Jesus said this as I close. He says, and I will build my church on this place, the gates of hell. And the gates of hell will not overpower it. We got the keys to do so.